So I always thought about and wanted to know what it took to capture somebody with a deranged mind. Do you have to become deranged in order to think like somebody with that type of a mind? What does it take to capture somebody like that? This may answer my questions.
My name's Mark Williams-Thomas, and I'm a former police detective. I now investigate some of the most notorious and dangerous killers in the UK. And this is how crime works. People often misuse the term serial killer. So serial killer applies to an individual who has killed 3 or more people over a period of 30 days or more. Do serial killers have an aura around them? Yes, some do. Because you can't be a serial killer without having some air of respectability, some position and status in life. So yeah, they do have an aura. Do they intimidate me? No. No one intimidates me. I've got 3 serial killer cases that I have specifically investigated and investigated in real detail. And that is the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, Angus Sinclair. He's responsible for probably at least another 10 unsolved murders. And then Peter Tobin. I do believe Peter Tobin is responsible for a number of other murders, at least 2 others who I have been able to directly link him to. So one of the first steps for any major investigation for a murder is profiling. You look in terms of where the crime has occurred, you go to the crime scene, and then you start to try and build up a picture of who the offender could be. I did a re-investigation of Peter Sutcliffe whilst he was in jail, who murdered 13 women, attempted to murder 8 others, and probably more in the 1980s. But my investigation of him really got to the heart of what he was about. He was convicted, went to jail on the basis that he had schizophrenia. We try and give a name to everything, a narcissistic, a psychopath, a schizophrenic, all of these terms. I challenge that. I don't believe that he did have schizophrenia. I was able to show that he was a psychopath. He had all the signs of psychopathy. And if he was prosecuted today, he would have gone to a mainstream prison. He wouldn't have gone to a hospital because he wasn't schizophrenic. He was a psychopath. Ted Bundy, where he has over-egged his involvement in a crime. Some of that is about probably wanting a greater status, about their own ego, about wanting to be the best of the best or the biggest of the serial killers. And some of that might well be that they actually believe it. I mean, very often, serial killers
to want to participate in competition in this area, in killing, like, holy, yeah. You're a psychopath, bro. To even think about making that a competition deems you one in my book, fam. And no, I didn't know the criteria for you being labeled a serial killer meant you did so many within a 30-day period. 30 days in the same month. Well, it don't have to be in the same month, but you get what I'm saying.
Believe what isn't true. They use cognitive distortion constantly because in order for them to commit that next murder, they have to justify it in their head that they're not going to get caught. Evidence is key for me because every single killer has to some degree some narcissism in them. There are lots of people who live amongst us every day who have the signs that we've associated with serial killers: psychopathy, narcissism. That's part of some people's makeup every day, and it doesn't make them killers. So once you've identified a potential suspect or suspects, your then position is to try and find evidence in relation to them. And that will be collecting any of the forensic elements around, but also CCTV, external factors. The victim will give you their victimology, will understand why they are a victim. You'll want to know what that person does on a day-to-day basis, who they interact with, where they go. We know very often serial killers will return to the scene of their crime at some stage. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, he returned back to the murder scene of one of his victims. And the reason he did that is because he thought that potentially one of the items he gave to his victims, a £5 note, could lead to him being found. He was so lucky that the police bungled and were so incompetent with their investigation that that £5 note didn't lead to him. You only need that droplet of DNA. You need that droplet of sweat, that droplet of blood, which is enough to link the killer to the crime scene.
They used to tell us that about arsonists. When I was in the fire service, they'd be like, man, you got to be careful and always pay attention to the crowds. Maybe you'll remember the faces or something of the people that you see in a crowd, because arsonists like to come back and watch it burn. So they do it, run off, and then when the people crowd up, they'll walk off and watch with the crowd of people and blend in. And to hear them saying that about us, it just took me back to that, man. People really like to come back, not only to make sure that all the evidence is gone, but to see their work.
We've lost too many cases by cross-contamination, by lack of continuity. So whilst DNA in one way can be absolutely nailing the offender, sometimes DNA actually doesn't make much difference. Even though it's their DNA, you've got to be able to show that that DNA there shouldn't be there. And the problem is, of course, with the large majority of murders are overwhelmingly committed by somebody known to the victim. So I set about to investigate if Angus Sinclair was responsible for other murders, to pull Angus Sinclair's life totally apart and rebuild it. Go right from the very beginning of his offending behaviour. We got to his wife. She talked me through his life. We then started to show this picture of an individual who, over 6 months, went on a killing spree. It's different to serial killers today. But when he was committing his crimes in the 1970s, he committed them all in the same way. Now, offenders have changed because they realise that if I commit the murder the same way over and over, the police will link it together. But not in those days. There was this period of time before the CSI effect where killers killed the same way. And what we saw, certainly when we investigated Sinclair, all of his victims were killed at a weekend and with their item of their own clothing. We collected enough evidence. Unfortunately, he died and the Crown was not prepared to prosecute him, given the fact that he was already in jail.
I also thought that them killing a specific way or something like that, tying them all together, was like a calling card for them. It was their calling card, so people knew it was them. That's what I thought. Now, blame it on the movies where I got that from, probably so, but that's what I thought in my mind that meant.
Tracking takes all kinds of different forms. Technology assists us massively. So you can put listening devices into houses, you can put probes into houses, you can do intercepts on phones, you can listen to phones. They have to have a certain amount of authority. But as an individual, I have to be careful. I have to be on the right side of the law. I have to make it proportionate. But there are things that I'll do. I'll send decoy packages to addresses. I can put trackers in parcels that go to people's houses. I could put a listening device into someone's house. We can use trackers. We can put what we refer to in the industry as lumps. We've now got technology that enables us to lump a car that gets audio as well as showing us on a real-time device where that individual's going. I've used it. So social media plays a crucial role because by and large, people use it, particularly the demographic of the individuals that we potentially look at in terms of potential suspects, where people live, the records that they keep, the memberships they have. People's whole footprint on social media is an integral part of any investigation now. Because of the CSI effect of offenders, they are now aware that if they travel to another area, put distance between them and where the crime occurred, the likelihood is that that police force won't talk to another police force. And therefore, there won't be a joined up thinking in relation to those crimes that have taken place. Viewers, listeners will be surprised to know that there is no national database that exists for unsolved murders. So we have a murder that happens in one part of the country, and there is no database where it will sit to be able to be compared on another part of the country. So serial killers will often taunt the police, and they'll get to a position where, of course, they feel confident. They've got away with a number of murders. There are other people out there who sometimes write in, pretending to be the killer, want to take that fame. And then that distracts the investigation entirely. The Zodiac killers, there are other cases. In the Yorkshire Ripper, we had an individual who became known as Wearside Jack, who wrote letters in claiming to be the killer. He wasn't. And therefore, they went looking for completely the wrong person, enabling them to eliminate Peter Sutcliffe on some basis.
I hope they still caught him and locked him up. You copycat. Like, who does that? Just want to take credit for it. Like, just go to a local jail and just turn yourself in before you do something dumb like that. Just go turn yourself in and go sit in a cell for a few years.
Well, serial killers are arrested in the same way as any other killer is arrested. So you get to a position where you've got reasonable grounds to arrest them, and you go and arrest them. Arrests are carefully planned to create the least amount of disturbance and secure the most amount of evidence. The biggest problem for the arrest of a suspect is the fact that it isn't executed. And of course, the worst case scenario is that that individual disappears. You don't get him. You don't execute it. Or something happens to them. It is about answers. And this is when we have to understand the impact on families and loved ones, is that they want answers. And if you can't give that because the individual's no longer there, then I think that's failing. Serial killers very, very rarely may come and admit it. And again, serial killers, when arrested, perhaps for something unconnected to a serial killing or unconnected to it, may well admit. And one of those classic examples was Peter Sutcliffe admitted finally when he was arrested because he was going to kill his latest victim and he had a false number plate. I do a lot of interviews with offenders, alleged offenders, whether it be through my television work or whether it be through undertaking risk assessments on dangerous offenders. You can always get someone to talk. How was last night? What do you think of this place? You then got to keep it going. And of course, you slowly take them to places where they're least comfortable, but then you bring them back to comfortable. There's also good cop and bad cop. It is about taking control. Get rid of barriers, take tables away. And I've seen too many interviews where the suspect takes control. Peter Tobin, who I've investigated, he would always talk in an interview, but he'd be angry. He'd tell you to go somewhere. He'd be violently aggressive in his tone. He wouldn't engage with you on a level where you could have a proper conversation. Whereas Angus Sinclair made no comment. There are times when I've watched Angus Sinclair's interviews and I think to myself, he's about to disclose, he's about to say something. And the police officers, I think, believe that too. The thing about Angus Sinclair is that when he was investigated for the murder of Catherine Rehill in 1961, his brother went into the interview room in the space between the police officers and said to Angus, "Did you kill her? If you did, you have to tell the police." And he did. This whole idea that body language is crucial and central to identifying someone. It's great in hindsight. It's brilliant. Once someone's gone to jail and you come away afterwards and go, do you know what? When they scratched their head or when they lifted their eyebrow or when they scratched their nose, it was clearly lying. Rubbish. When I interviewed Stuart Hazel for the murder of Tia Sharp, I knew Stuart Hazel was lying because the evidence told me. He sat there and looked at me in the eye, telling me what he believed was true. But I knew it was an interview with a killer, and actually it led to his subsequent arrest, 38 years in jail. My interview was played in the opening of the Old Bailey trial, the Central Criminal Court. It was instrumental to the prosecution's case. So the biggest cause of false imprisonment in terms of getting the wrong person is senior investigating officers in major investigations become fixated on a hypothesis, become fixated on the suspect, and they do everything they can to get the evidence to secure them. And that's why we have miscarriages of justice. Probably the most notorious case that I've worked on where a killer was identified by the police and prosecuted for what they considered to be the murderer was Barry George in relation to Jill Dando. I can tell you, and I've spent an awful lot of time investigating that case, he didn't kill Jill Dando. Absolutely not. The police got it utterly wrong. They became fixated on Barry George as their suspect, and they found the evidence that they believed was enough to secure the conviction. And it was. It did get convicted. Of course.
Found? Or did they manufacture something? Like, I feel like he's leaving some things out right now. And I get it. Probably can't say or anything like that. But yeah, something sounds really, really shady happened in that situation.
When it then got looked at carefully later in terms of the evidence, it was found to be completely and utterly wrong, which is why he got acquitted. No, the police went after the wrong man. They got the evidence they believed fitted, and it never fitted. Don't forget, with serial killers, the first time they get caught, they may well have been killing for 20, 30 years. And they may well only get caught for one or two of their victims, and the others are not known about. So Angus Sinclair was convicted of 3 murders and 1 manslaughter in 1961 with Catherine Rehill. But prior to that, he got prosecuted for 2 of those murders, but was never convicted. And the reason he wasn't convicted is his defense was that it was consensual. He finally got prosecuted when they got evidence to show to the contrary. When it came to the victims of the Yorkshire Ripper, these were sex workers. And the police, not until the 5th victim, acknowledged and felt that there was a real victim. So they passed off the first 5 victims. Serial killers may get prosecuted early on in their offending or early on in their court offending period of time and get away with it, but continue to offend thereafter. The minimum term for murder is life. But of course, there are sliding scales in relation to that. Our criminal justice system still needs a lot of work. I think in terms of life, the US conviction rate is worse than the UK. It may well be also to do to their criminal justice system, the court process, the way that all of that is set up, and the way that the public give evidence. If you as a victim giving first-hand testimony feel that you are going to be hung out to dry, you're not going to be listened to, you're not going to be believed, you're going to be vulnerable, then will you give evidence? And of course, that means massively that whilst you may be able to arrest somebody, you can't prosecute them. So your prosecution rate goes down. I believe there has to be, rightly so, a punitive effect. And that's first and foremost, certainly for serial killers, it has to be a punitive effect. But there also has to be restorative. And that restorative doesn't mean the individuals get released into community. What it means is they understand why they've committed their offences. They understand the impact of the victims. That restorative justice within that criminal justice system for serial killers is absolutely crucial. But the criminal justice system isn't set up for that. So my background is as a former police detective. I was school captain at school, and I was a very active individual. And I thought, what is it that I could do that would keep me outside and keep me active? So I'd applied to Surrey and Hampshire. And at the same time as I'd applied to those police forces, I'd also been offered a sports exchange to New Zealand to go and play rugby. And I was offered a job with the police. And I thought, I'll do that rather than go and play rugby. Now, I don't have any regrets in life apart from that. I wish I'd have put that on hold, joining the police service and gone and played rugby. My mental health over the last 2.5 years, I've been to rock bottom. I've now realized that actually it's probably what I've seen. It's what I've done. It's the world that I live in. I can't.
Yeah, you would think, bro, you need to speak to somebody after chasing that type of person down, that type of a mind. you need to go decompress. You need to go, because you pretty much, like I said before, you probably become that person. You're trying to figure them out so much, you become that person. It's like taking on the role in a movie. You're learning so much about that person, and then you're seeing what that person either did or is doing. Like all of that, fam. I don't know why we think this stuff doesn't affect us, but it does.
I care about people. I care about the job that I do. And I think if I didn't do that, it would make me a very different person. But I acknowledge that the years that I've seen the worst of the worst, I've seen the worst possible impact of crime. I know how powerful the media is. I know that if I can put a program out there that can give answers to people, then that's helpful. And I do. And anybody that watches my programs will see that it's not about me. It's about getting the evidence, using my skills, and giving answers to people. I'm probably best known for my role as exposing Jimmy Savile. I made an hours-long program, and it resulted in his name or the case appearing on the front pages for 41 consecutive days. It resulted in numerous people being arrested and prosecuted, like Rolf Harris, Max Clifford, and other very high-profile individuals. I have a series on Netflix called The Investigator, and I was the man that interviewed Oscar Pistorius for the very first time.
Now, this is going to sound weird to you, but, and trust me, it messed me up when I heard of it. You ever heard of Prisneyland? Not Disneyland, Prisneyland. Inside California's new prison model termed Prisneyland.
From a distance, it's exactly what you would expect. Big fence, barbed wire, and of course, gun towers, like a prison postcard or something.
So it's about 9 o'clock in the morning. We're about 10 minutes away from going inside to Valley State Prison, supposedly one of the most progressive prisons in all of the country. The nickname is Prisneyland, although from the outside, it looks pretty standard, but we'll see what the inside looks like. Let's go. Thank you.
Right inside, not much difference.
This is the deadly high voltage electric fence, apparently. Obviously, don't want to touch this.
But the more you get to know Prisneyland, which officials say some locals refer to it as, you realize the first barriers coming down aren't actually physical.
And as we were talking, we don't really call them inmates here.
Incarcerated individuals.
Incarcerated individuals.
And that's where the differences between this prison and others around California just begin. Violence plagues our country's system of incarceration. When people get out, they have extreme difficulties finding a job. And while the data varies state by state, about half end up back in custody within a few years. All of that is why officials say the Golden State is trying to move in a new direction, starting a pilot program at 2 facilities with the goal to replicate the results in Scandinavia, where Norway says reforms over the last 2.5 decades have brought down the rate of reoffending within 2 years to only 20%, much lower than here in the U.S. They've also decreased the prison population significantly and have helped people reincorporate into society after they serve their time.
You have a key to your own cell.
Yeah, everybody has their own key.
Authorities here say the most important thing they're trying to change at Valley State Prison is how it feels.
This is the central courtyard.
Yeah.
I feel very peaceful just looking at it.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Am I recording? You're on, man.
Officials told us the only way to truly understand the reforms is by coming and experiencing them.
One of the principles of the California model is normalization, and the idea is we want to make the environment inside our institutions as normal as possible, with the goal of not releasing somebody who's institutionalized, but releasing citizens back to the community who have practiced normal pro-social behavior.
What about the argument that somebody might see this and say, well, isn't part of the goal punishment in some way? Why give them all of this nice stuff?
So I would say that people go to court to be punished. That's up to our judges and our juries. And when they come into our institutions, our goal is to basically help them become better citizens. So
I like the sound of this. I'm not going to lie to y'all. I like the sound of this. We've often talked about a lot of people go to jail or go to prison, and it ain't nothing but a university or a school for them to get better at whatever crimes they committed, to get even better. They learn more about crime, committing more crimes, and get better at that. Like, they go in with what he said on the movie Blow. I went in with a doctorate of marijuana, came out with he went in with a bachelor's of marijuana and came out with a doctorate of cocaine. Like, that's what usually happens. And like they said, they're back in there in a few years. So seeing them actually be rehabilitated, this seems to be dope. But this is just the beginning. We have to see what all it entails of.
With that in mind, we are not in the punishment business. We're in the rehabilitative business.
I found it. Go to fat. All right, perfect.
A big part of that rehabilitation, a wide array of programs where the population learns a variety of coping and calming skills.
And she is a good horse.
Did you know you were going to be grooming horses in prison?
No, to be honest, I thought I'd be stuck in a cell, maybe a few rehabilitation groups, but it helps me, cope with, a lot of stresses I deal with, day to day here in prison.
The hope is that creating a more positive environment makes the men locked up here more willing to rehabilitate. Of the total incarcerated population of 3,000 here, the prison says 2,400 are enrolled in training or education programs, including high school and college.
This day is the first day of the rest of our lives. We can start our day at any time.
When you came in and you saw what this was, what was your impression?
I thought I was going to come to prison and get worse, but coming to prison actually saved my life.
Wow. Say it again.
Coming to prison saved my life.
Since they started running these programs in 2017, Valley State Prison says it's reduced violence compared to other peer facilities. According to reports from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, prisons across the state have seen between 15 and 32 homicides total each year between 2017 and 2021. At Valley State, 0. And only 1 recorded assault or battery against staff versus the hundreds at other facilities.
Get in the middle, you guys are going to circle me.
One of the most successful programs is dog training. Inmates working with puppies to become service dogs, eventually sent to help people across the country.
For a long time, we were releasing citizens back into the community that had not improved their thought process. They had not rehabilitated from their behavior, and they go out and reoffend. And so when you start to introduce rehabilitative programs, when you start to introduce hope into this community, you really are transforming their thought process.
We followed a few of the dog trainers back to their cells. The doors locked from the outside, but they look a little more like something else.
Feels like a dorm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Did you expect that when you came in?
No.
So right now we are walking your dog past the pool table back to your spot in prison. It's pretty wild. So is this like the dog wing? It almost feels like to a lot of people that might watch this that
They're too easy on us.
yes.
I would say no, because a lot of us worked our ways down.
Sure.
So I came from a higher level, and it took me 7 years to come down to this.
People that are gonna see this and say, shouldn't prison be a punishment? In some way. It should be reformation too, but it should also be, it should suck, right?
Yeah, so
this doesn't suck.
It does suck.
It does suck. Okay, tell me why.
It does suck, right? I don't get to hug my family.
Right.
Would you rather want somebody coming out and getting reformed, or somebody coming in and getting out the same way they came in, or worse?
Steve Patterson, after taking us to prison land, is joining us now. We are so grateful to you for bringing us that inside look with that rare access, Steve. So here's a question, right? And some of those numbers, pretty noteworthy that you talked about as it relates to this particular facility. What about if one of the goals is to prevent reoffenders from coming back into the prison system? Is that actually working? Is it helping some of these incarcerated individuals, as they call them, lead more productive lives after they get out?
I think it's important to say all of this is still too early in the program's life.
Okay.
We're still in the proof of concept territory, right? This is a pilot program at 2 of the state's more than 30 prisons. What does it look like when you scale that up? We just don't know yet. What I can say, though, is that the early data is really promising. The stories that we've heard both in the inside and the outside speak volumes. And it's so important because we were able to get that access. So there's so much more reporting that we've done on this, from the women's prison across the street to some of the vocations training that they're doing to a guy who was released from behind bars after more than 10 years. All of that, including some more of the data, I can't wait to share with you. Allie.
We can't wait to see it. More here on this show, Steve. We're going to have you right back here next week. Thank you so much, friend. Really appreciate all the hard work and time that you and your team and your producer, PJ, have put into this. Thanks.